Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast, a developer discussion that dives deep into all things web. We discuss everything from developing for mobile to building HDTV software, from wearables and robotics to user experience and mentoring. We bring to our listeners everything related to building products and services for the web platform of today, tomorrow, and beyond.
Your hosts today are myself, Eric Isaacson, UX engineer at 3Pillar Global, and Christian Smith, open source developer and startup enthusiast. This episode number 3, we are excited to talk about Backend As A Service, GoInstant and GoAngular, with Matt Creager, developer evangelist at GoInstant and team lead for GoAngular. Matt is calling in from Halifax, Nova Scotia today, and Matt is the core contributor to GoAngular, a data synchronization integration for AngularJS. It's his baby, and he admits to having an unhealthy developer project relationship with it. And previously, Matt worked at BlackBerry analyzing petabytes of data, building real-time analytics dashboards, debugging enormous distributed systems, and doing his best to understand what makes for healthy systems and happy users. So welcome today, Matt. How are you doing?
Hey guys, thanks for inviting me on.
So you've been working through a lot of really cool stuff. I know that GoInstant uses a lot of Node.js in the back end, and you guys are now you were at ngConf and you did a lot of really cool stuff. People know when they think of Backend as a service, they think of the Firebase thing, but it's not the case. You guys are getting really big. You're owned by Salesforce. You are big already. Do you feel like, what is Backend as a service in general? So for people who not know what it is it exactly?
Yeah, I tried to explain this to my wife the other day unsuccessfully. What is a backend as a service? It's a good question. So I guess when you think about, the incredible variety of applications that are available now across all of the different platforms, you've got obviously web and mobile, and you've got, I've got a computer sitting underneath my TV now that I think Steam powers. It's almost surprising to consider how much all of these applications have in common when you get right down to their nuts and bolts. Mm-hmm. And when you're looking at that foundation, it's probably going to include things like storage and user management, permissioning, and integration with social networks, push notifications. If we're talking about GoInstant and GoAngular, real-time capabilities. And over the years as an industry, we've kind of discovered that the best way to build large applications, and I can't remember who I'm quoting right now, but is just not to build large applications. So we take these things and we break them into these little bite-sized pieces. And then we show all these pieces how to communicate using APIs and SDKs. And so the BAAS category, the Backend as a Service category, is kind of the progression of this abstraction, where we take all these things that these applications share and require to operate effectively, arguably effectively, and we create these managed services which we then sell, or in our case, give away for free. My father-in-law is a contractor, and this is the example I tried to use when I was explaining this to Britt. I say, can you imagine if every time your dad decided he wanted to build a house, he went outside and started chopping down trees and then preparing the wood to be used in the house? I mean, that's pretty much what, in some cases, we do as developers. We start right from scratch. But, the Backend of a service is really about coming into a house that's already fully framed and picking out your bathroom sink or your kitchen counter. And that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to give developers that level of control. We want them to come in and just start building their application, not worry about their foundation so much, not just keep reinventing the wheel. And the benefit of that specialization is that you get people who become very, very good at building these single things. So in GoInstant's case, GoInstant, these are guys who really know real time and started building a real-time API. And now that's kind of moving into more of a, what else do people need if they don't just need a real-time API? They need things like the user management and OAuth. So, that's kind of what a backend as a service is and how we got into it.
And do you see any specific advantages or challenges that keep coming up for building like static applications, as I've heard the term called?
Yeah, I mean, there's tons and tons of challenges I think as an industry, we've also become very adept at building server-side applications, and this new thick client thing is pretty new to us. We've started, we've got some great frameworks. Angular is an example of a great framework. But it wasn't that long ago that we were basically just hacking things together with jQuery plugins. And that's not a very scalable way to build web applications. We only recently introduced package management to the client, and that's still not completely figured out yet. We're just stealing stuff from Node. So I think the challenge is that we're moving more and more stuff to the client, but it's not very mature yet. The tools we use to automate our workflow aren't very mature. Our package management isn't mature. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge, is both just educating our community around why these backends of a service are so effective, and also maturing the client-side ecosystem so that we can take full advantage of them.
Right. And you guys, Christian and I were actually on a hackathon in February. It's called the Static Showdown, which was building static applications, where I went in, at least, with the conception of there's a very limited amount of things you could do with these applications. That was huge misconception on my part, looking at all the different tools that were available, and like the scale of data that you could work with. The security actually was the biggest thing. Can you speak about like the authorization pieces of GoAngular, GoInstant?
Sure. So I think we're coming from a place where dropping a token into a cookie and then using that to authenticate a session is kind of the status quo.
Yeah.
And you've seen Twitter, for example, handle this same issue, where they're like, okay, so we want to have this API. We're building a platform here as well as a product. So how do we give people secure access to this? And so OAuth and token-based authentication is becoming more popular. So you authenticate with their API. You basically get a secret key. You encrypt some local user data into that key, and then you send that back and forth. And so the client never actually has that information available to them. It's just in this encrypted key, which is sent around, and anyone who has that secret can decrypt it and look at that information. So that's kind of the model that we've adopted at GoInstant, is token-based authentication. And I think it's a pretty good model. I think it works, but people are perhaps not accustomed to it, not used to it. It does add another barrier between you and finishing your application, and that really only secures one part of the whole process. That just secures authentication. It doesn't handle things like permissions or groups or user management. So you want to have an administrator who has access to a specific set of things. Well, you can't really do that in the client. You need to do that on a server. You need to say, okay, this user is allowed to access these things. You need to change their claims or add them to a specific group, re-encrypt that token, and then pass that back and forth between all the APIs that their application shares. It's just, it's a pretty, it's definitely not an ideal solution. It's pretty complex. And if you've looked at ACLs, so ACLs are the mechanism that GoInstant uses to secure parts of your data structure. Yeah. I can say that we've definitely had some challenges trying to communicate how that works and why it's an effective way of securing your data. And we've discovered lots of ways that it isn't effective, that it isn't useful. So yeah, not a solved problem, I'm afraid.
Matt, what other security models have you looked at? What other kinds of access control policy? There's role-based access control. I think I just read about something called attribute-based access control. Rule-based access control. There's a few other models out there. Have you guys explored other areas?
So we actually have a guy who's kind of our security expert, and that guy is not me. But I can say that a lot of the push towards the ACL to have this. So the ACL is this static document which doesn't change, and every person that's connected to a session. So in a real-time API, in case anyone's unfamiliar, you have a shared session which lots of people connect to, and then interact with the data. And the data is persisting, and anytime that data changes, anyone that's interested in it is notified of that change. Any client that's connected is notified. And so, some of those clients might have access to that data, and some of them may not have the permissions to access that data. And so the ACL is this kind of static document that you're able to check very quickly. And that's really the reason that I think we went with the ACL. It's the fact that it is simple to put an ACL together, even though maybe everybody's not quite grasping it, and it's very fast, because in a real-time API you can't spend a great deal of time checking permissions every time data changes, because that's an exponential problem. Like every person that connects, multiplies the number of notifications that are going to take place every time data changes. So if that gets multiplied and then you have this ACL that's going to be checked every time, you can see how this might become quite a bottleneck. So I think that's what drove it. But yeah, I mean, we are considering other security policies too. I can tell you that much.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's something too. Like, I hear people who don't like working with JavaScript in general tell me is, like when I tell them that JavaScript's like the language I primarily code with, they're like, how do you deal with that? And, the security in the browser, you can't really handle it. But I mean, when I see stuff like the ACLs and even like the web crypto library that's now being implemented in Chromium and some of the other browsers, it's like that's not going to be the conception in the future for sure.
Now, be honest, do you have the same reaction when somebody tells you they're programming in PHP?
Actually, because I've only I haven't coded too much with PHP. Like I'd have to say that I've done a little bit, but I know that it's doable to do it well. Right? I've seen people do it really good, but I've seen a lot of people do it really bad, and I think that's true with JavaScript too.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, we just have, that's a convention in our industry. If you program with language X and I program with language Y, we're going to argue about that.
Yeah, totally. So I mean, you did a great description of that with the security. I got a chance to play with GoInstant. Is trying to build out a web component for this. And I feel awful I haven't had a chance to really commit anything to it recently, but one of the things I really liked about the API was that you're working with promises. At least in the GoInstant piece, I haven't used the GoAngular directly, but there's this concept of rooms too inside of there, and I haven't seen that in the other frameworks. Can you really talk to that?
Yeah. So what do you want me to hit first? Promises or rooms?
All of the above. So whichever. So how about rooms first? Because that's a pretty core concept to the API for GoInstant, right?
The promises, sorry?
The
rooms?
The rooms.
The rooms, okay. Yeah, so the rooms were kind of a way to naturally organize people. I mean, you end up in these situations where, maybe I should start with how GoInstant actually came together. They were trying to build this co-browsing technology. So multiple people are seeing the same web page and able to interact with it. That was the product that GoInstant was originally working on. And they kind of pivoted into real-time as a platform, backend as a service, when they started to find all of these common themes. And one of these common themes was the need to isolate and separate users in a session. So for example, you might want chat. And you don't want the data the transactions that are taking place in chat to be confused with the transactions that are taking place with, for example, synchronizing your mouse, moving your mouse right on the screen and having everybody see that. And so the rooms just became like a really simple way to kind of denote what or categorize those transactions and users. So you put all the users in a specific room, and maybe that room's about chat, and now you know where the users who are chatting are. And the cool thing about that is you can, for example, we built a plugin for Ghost called Ouija, commenting system. And so what's kind of neat about it in Ouija is you're able to say how many people are on each blog post. And anyone who's not familiar with Ghost, it's a publishing platform. It's a blogging system. It's really simple. And so you're able to basically say each post is a room, and all of the comments are associated with that room. And any user that's currently in that room is part of that conversation. And that's just a very easy way to separate the different posts from each other, but also lets you do things like see how many people are in each post, how many people are interacting with each comment, things like that. So it ended up being a pretty powerful tool that we perhaps stumbled upon it early on. And then promises. So promises actually started in GoAngular. So we started building promises for GoAngular. And I've always been a really big advocate of promises. I love promises. I think they're they're the natural progression from continuous passing style. Sorry, and it took a little bit of work to convince my hardcore nodies at GoInstant, because GoInstant is just chock full of hardcore nodies. They love nodies, they love continuous passing style. But it wasn't that long after I added it to GoAngular that we started talking about it as an upcoming client-side developer convention. And Ian, who's our VP, just said, if you want it so bad, add it. And I think he said that like he's not really going to add it. He's got too much other stuff on his plate. So that afternoon, I dropped everything else I was doing and added it to the core, our core platform. And a few days later, we had promises in.
Yeah, I find I'm really liking it on the front end. I have heard people from Node.js community not really care for it because of that, but yeah, I love it on the front end. Christian, what do you think with that?
I kind of walk on both sides of the fence on that one. Work on both back-end stuff in Node and front-end stuff. And I found promises work really well for front-end things because it's becoming a convention in the JavaScript community on the front end. And callbacks and continuation passing style really works well in Node. I think they're two different beasts. And so I take the when in Rome, do as the Romans approach. It works really well for me. I'm comfortable with both styles, and I see advantages and disadvantages. But if you're working with Angular, you got to be working with promises because everything else is promise-based. So it's really good to have that as part of your library.
Yeah, I think just having everybody do the same thing is probably most important, or have it at least be compatible with both. Like the GoInstant platform is capable of doing callbacks or promises, and I think that's a pretty good convention for libraries that are going to operate in the client. But yeah, in Node, I mean, let's face it, callbacks have just kind of won, haven't they? And that was because there was some sort of maybe not an optimal implementation of promises early on. I remember they did introduce promises to Node way back when I was first playing around. It never stuck, and I think it just kind of turned the whole community off promises. And now, of course, you've got streams, and streams work really, really well. So.
And generators too. I think
generators.
Yeah.
Koa is showing an alternative in Node to the callback model.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a pretty cool project. So yeah, I mean, is there plans for implementing ES6 or anything with any of this stuff?
Oh, there's definitely discussions about implementing ES6. I mean, like I was talking to some of the core Angular guys are saying that they're already transpiling. Well, they transpile for the version 2, and I'm realistically just waiting to get my grubby little hands on that. And as soon as I do, I'll be transpiling a version of GoAngular. I'll start almost immediately.
Yeah, and I heard recently that Google's obviously using Creager, right? But is there, because I know Ember is using something else, maybe ES Next or something. I mean, have you guys looked into the different transpilers?
Yeah, I've used Tracer just playing around, and I expect I would use Tracer because that's what Angular is using, and I try to adhere to their I try to follow their lead in GoAngular, which makes it easier. You have to make less decisions, right?
So how did you come up with GoAngular? How did this start in the company?
Well, I think when I started, we want to service client-side developers. GoInstant is just really about making it easy for developers to build real-time applications. And that's kind of transforming into build any type of application. It doesn't have to be real-time. But in the early days, it was very much about real-time. And, I think they always had their heart set on supporting every framework that was feasible. And the biggest community at the time, the most vocal community, was probably Backbone. But when I came on board, I was already somewhat familiar with Angular. I'd used Angular to build a number of dashboards at BlackBerry, and I just liked Angular. And when I first came on, I thought they were going to have me do something data analytics related or dashboard related, some roll D3 on something. They didn't. They asked me to build this integration using Angular, and so I dove right into that. And today we have GoAngular. The first version was just terrible, by the way. I mean, the first version just didn't make any sense. I used it as an example of all the things you shouldn't do, which is, maybe it's a good example. But the Angular community is, I think, really what draws me to Angular, in that they are so open and willing to help you move a project forward, in their ecosystem. And so I think that's really why GoAngular ended up being successful, is that we had people in the community who were willing to look at it and help us and offer us suggestions.
Yeah, there's some really outspoken people on that team, and they're very approachable. I've contacted people on Google Plus or even LinkedIn, and people respond right away, like core team members, like, hey, what problems are you having, which is great. Same feeling from the community with GoInstant though too. Like if I make a comment on your documentation, usually I'll get somebody saying something within an hour or two.
Yeah, we're all sitting there watching the documentation for comments. Yeah, I mean we do our best to respond as quickly as possible, mainly because we're all just trying to build cool stuff, and if you're trying to build something cool and our API is getting in your way, then we want to fix that. We kind of see it, we kind of look at it like we're all on the same team, very very much on the same team, and we're all just trying to build stuff. And we all have that in common, and I don't want to have problems with another API, and so I can really empathize with somebody having challenges with our APIs or our documentation or one of our libraries. So,
and like as far as like Firebase, they just released the Firebase hosting. Are you guys planning on doing something with that, like hosting platform like DivShot or Firebase hosting? If you can't comment on that, that's fine.
Yeah. I mean, I think I can. Our product manager, Ben Yoskovich, will probably give me hell later. But, I think that, I don't know. To be honest with you, I'm not sure if that's something that we will do. I mean, I don't think it's in our best interest in some ways. Like, I think it's better to partner with people who are making that their breadwinner. There's already companies out there. There's already services out there for hosting static assets. So, in my personal opinion, this isn't on behalf of GoInstant. I think it would be better to partner with somebody that's already doing that and trying to do the best they can, and having them do that. And we'll continue to do what we do best, and we'll let them do what they do best.
Yeah, I mean, like look at DivShot, right? For instance, DivShot.io. That's what they do, is just the hosting piece, right? So, and they have the CLI, and they don't have a backend as a service as far as I've seen. Maybe they have one planned, but it seems like they're pretty focused on just that one piece.
Yeah, I think there's lots of room to make that awesome, and so it's kind of maybe there's some type of symbiotic relationship.
Matt, that goes back to what you were saying about building small stuff that works well together. That seems to be the one principle that makes everything work on the internet, is interoperability and having common interfaces and that kind of thing. Do you have any suggestions for people that are building stuff to make them more interoperable with GoInstant and other providers?
I mean, it starts with communication, right? Like, communication is just hard. And, we have to just all, as a community, make that extra effort to reach out and touch base with each other and discuss what we're doing and how that's going to affect other projects that are dependencies. Because I think that's probably where the biggest problem comes in is, you're building something, you're building a business that's dependent on GoInstant's platform. And yet that platform is changing over time. And so you're trying to hit this moving target. And so I think it's all about, how will we communicate with each other and how transparent we are about our plans with our projects, with our libraries, and how we're going to move them forward and evolve them. And I think, it is difficult to all head in the same direction, and I don't know how it's working, but for somehow it is. Somehow we all seem to be kind of swimming in the same direction. The current's taking us the same way, and that's a really good thing. I mean, more specific, more actionable than that, follow best practices when you're building libraries, and don't expect to get it right the first time. So, for example, in GoAngular, it was all about adhering to what Angular was doing as a community. Figuring out which way they were headed and trying to make sure I was, pushing in the same direction. And in Ouija, which is that integration I mentioned we launched a few weeks ago, that was all about joining the Ghost community and figuring out what was important to the Ghost community and which direction they were pushing in. And so, for example, in the Ghost community, they've opted to use Ember as their client-side framework of choice for their admin interfaces. So the actual blog is like a handlebars theme, so it's super lightweight and simple, but the back end, the admin and where you'll be integrating your plugins and stuff, that's all going to be done in Ember. I think they are a great case point, because if you look at the discussion that happened in their issues between the people who were pushing for Angular and the people who were pushing for Ember, and there was no trolling. I mean, it was boring in a way. I mean, where's all the drama, right? But it was a really powerful example of how we can kind of all pull together, discuss the pros and cons of each framework, and find what's best in that specific use case, and then just all run with it together. We've got a pretty smart industry. If we need to pick up two frameworks and be able to use them both competently, we're very capable of doing that. And so now you've got a bunch of people that are going to use Ember as the plugin framework for Ghost, and I think that's totally cool. And the people that were pushing for Angular, they jumped right on board and like, okay, no big deal, we can learn it. And then the who was it? Code School? I can't remember who it was, but there was a course. A company that does like web courses that offered to give a free course to anyone that was contributing to Ghost, the Ember course for free, basically, to anyone that was contributing to Ghost. So I think maybe that's the last thing I would say is like, be willing to go above and beyond to help people adopt your library or your best practice or whatever it is that you believe will help our industry move forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, you're building open source stuff. It's definitely, people are going to see your stuff all the time. So you want to make sure that you're taking care of everybody, you're checking the issues, you're having documentation on it. I think that's really true.
Well, I mean, you guys mentioned too before you fired up the recording that you guys have been doing a lot of co-piloting, a lot of peer coding, yeah. And I think that's another good example too. Is we need to be able to kind of watch and adopt each other's best techniques. So it's a matter of like trading skills and trading libraries. We all have this in common. Let's build it and make it awesome.
Yeah, and did you feel you went to ngConf, the first of its kind, right? And I saw you did some great videos on building stuff with GoAngular, and I saw that there was a video for Angular Fire as well from that conference. Did you feel like that community was together with everything?
You know what? I did. Like, it was almost like everybody was first kind of testing the water with their toes, and then by the end of it was fully in, head first.
Yeah.
It was an incredible conference. Bringing all those people together. You could tell that the core Angular team was very surprised that they had created something that had garnished this much enthusiasm. But it had. That was a full room. And I've been to a lot of conferences over the years. A lot of them technical, but it's funny, sometimes you go to the talks and kind of half the room is checked out. They're doing something else.
Yeah.
And their head somewhere else, and maybe they're thinking I'll watch this later on the recording. But they're kind of half checked in. It didn't feel like that at all at ngConf. Like everybody was totally checked into all of the content.
A lot of passionate
pretty
people.
Impressed. Yeah, a lot of passionate people, and I don't know, it's just easier to be passionate about open source, something that you're sharing with your community. Like before this, I mentioned I worked at BlackBerry and I worked on a lot of closed source projects. Like nobody's ever going to see any of the source that came from that, which is good because I'd be embarrassed. But it's bad because I couldn't enjoy it as much. I couldn't enjoy it as much.
There's something about putting your work out there while you're working on it for everybody to see. Seems to make it better, right? Because you're afraid to leave it messy because somebody might come along and see that and think you're an idiot, right?
And I think it's the acceptance mind. You have that trepidation, like oh God, like people are going to hate this and think it's dumb, and then somebody comments on it or downloads it. I mean, there's no better feeling than having a module that somebody downloads, right? Like. And it doesn't have to be many. I wrote a Gulp plugin and it had 36 downloads a week or two ago. And I was just like, it's probably got 39 now. But I looked at that and I was like, this is so cool. People downloaded this and used it. And then it feels even better when you go and look at the issues and there isn't any. You're just like, whew, that feels good.
It's such a different environment for building software now than it was even 10 years ago. And it's amazing how far we've come in adopting a different way of working.
Yeah, I was thinking about this the other night, actually. I was trying to explain this to a friend. We were hosting a birthday party, and they said, like, what's your motivator at work? What keeps you going? And, they were asking, do you have a manager there or a product manager? And GoInstant's got a fairly flat organizational structure. But, I realized the pressure I have, the pressure that I work under has nothing to do with anybody that manages me at GoInstant or Salesforce. It's all about the people that are using the products that I contribute to and how focused I am on them being happy. And when they find issues, I just find that, that just is so unsatisfying. I can't handle that. I hate that. And so that's the biggest motivator for me. And I would guess a lot of people feel that way. So this is just, companies have just figured out this unbelievable way to motivate us to work harder. Let us share our code.
That's awesome. One of the things too that I really am passionate about with the the stuff, everything happening in the web platform today, like is offline architecture. That's one of the biggest things for me. So I noticed that you have an issue on GoAngular, issue number 50, where you're talking about possibly doing offline architecture, and now with Service Worker being able to be used in Firefox under Flag and
infamous issue number 50.
Yeah, so can you talk to that offline? Because if for me, like some experiences on websites where the data just it isn't there if I'm in a bad place, like if I'm at a conference and I have no Wi-Fi, I'm really pissed off, you know.
Yeah. So, okay, this in a way comes back to our discussion around, how do you build something that works inside of an ecosystem? And part of that is that you draw a line between what will exist in your library or in your extension, in your plugin, in your integration, and what's going to be part of the core platform. And so I think offline first is kind of an example of that, where it's that line's a little bit fuzzy. Do we add offline first to GoAngular, or do we add offline first to the platform, the platform as a whole?
So I say both.
Yeah, but
I am not a GoInstant employee. So.
hopefully, if you add it to the core platform, now adding it to the integration becomes much simpler. And I think GoInstant does have, again, speaking on my own behalf, not on behalf of GoInstant or Salesforce. I think we've got big plans for the API, and those plans are going to take a little time to come to fruition because they're ambitious. But once they do, offline first will 100% be a part of that at one point or another, and you'll see it move to GoAngular, because realistically, you can't offer something nowadays. You can't offer something that doesn't have offline support. If somebody wants to build an application with GoAngular and they care about offline support, it's going to be a lot of work for them to add that themselves.
Yeah.
And really, it's work that they shouldn't do, because they're going to find that same line. What should belong in my application and what should belong in this integration? And realistically, that either belongs in the integration or even at a lower level than that. We're seeing this kind of like emerging trend of data management in the client, and I think that's a really interesting problem domain, and it's something that we're going to have to solve.
Cool. I'm excited.
Me too.
Matt, I'm really curious. Do you have knowledge about the back end of GoInstant a little more? Like what's driving that? What technologies are driving that? I'm guessing that you guys didn't just hook up Socket.io to Redis and call it a day.
Yeah, that's always the funniest. Yeah, when somebody says, it used to be when GoInstant was co-browse, people used to just say, oh, it's just an iframe. And now that it's a backend of a service, it's just Socket.io. So no, GoInstant on the back end it's a host of small, scalable services that have very specific jobs. Some of them, I think most of them are written in Node. There's a couple actually written in Go for performance reasons, but most of them are written in Node, and they do a variety of different things. They handle things like user presence. So there's a service specifically for user presence. There's a connection server, which just handles the connections, toggling on and off. We've got instances of Redis that can scale out, and most of this is stateless. So, the connection server doesn't know about the present service for very long. They're all kind of interacting through AMQP, which is their method of communicating. Publishing and subscribing to each other, and then of course you have storage. The storage is taking place, and recently we've added a whole other part of this, which is the operational transformations, and that's a completely separate service which stands on its own and deals with just managing those transformations. And OT, in case anyone's not familiar with it, is if you've ever used Google Docs, it's the algorithms that keep people in sync while looking at text. So the text is going to continue to make sense to you regardless of how many people are interacting with it and changing it. And so, yeah, that's kind of what GoInstant really is. It's these small services that are all communicating with each other to provide client-side developer API and a RESTful server-side API and an Apple SDK. That's
a really awesome architecture, and it seems like that style of building things is almost becoming commoditized, right? Where it used to be you had to be some big enterprise to build a service-oriented architecture, but now you can wire up these little things with Node and string them all together and make it look like one service on the outside, but you have something that's way easier to manage.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
That's pretty cool.
And you can, the whole time as GoInstant has evolved, as we've had more and more user adoption, and of course taken on projects inside of Salesforce, we've been able to pick and choose pieces of that architecture that need to be iterated on, that need to be improved, that need to be able to scale. So, for example, I think it was the user presence server. So we have a user presence server, and all that does is it manages who's in what room. So you know where they are, and you know who to notify when something changes, because they're somebody that cares. And it also handles all kinds of other things, like somebody gets disconnected from the client. That's going to be different than somebody who just refreshes the page, or somebody that's actively kicked off using the API. So it manages those types of relationships too. And that's a service that originally couldn't handle more than, I don't remember the exact number of users, but it couldn't scale horizontally, so we couldn't just spin up another one and another one and another one. And so it was interesting listening to that team. We do a workshop, actually, there's a workshop happening right now, in which all of the different guys responsible for the different parts of the architecture talk about what they're working on and why. And a couple of weeks ago, it was basically that we need to make presence horizontally scale. There's enough users for that now, and we've got to figure out what that's going to look like and how it's going to interact with the rest of the architecture. And that's just something that they implemented the other day.
Wow, that's really cool. I was actually wondering how that happened with the user presence, and because I can imagine you have like tens of thousands of people, connecting, and how does that all scale? And it's a lot of questions, and that's pretty awesome what you guys are doing.
There's definitely been some fun problems to solve.
Another thing I love about some of these newer backend as a service things is that your data is URL accessible, right? I mean, how cool is that? I saw that when I was looking through your API, and it's like Firebase, that you can just say, here's the path that this value lives at, and get it back. That is just, amazing that we've actually arrived there.
Yeah, you can jump in the key viewer, you can see your whole data structure, and you can navigate through your data structure and find specific parts of it and manipulate it. That was really nice when we were working on Ouija, because it meant that because the Ghost platform doesn't currently have a back end, they haven't added the apps API is what it's going to be called. Everything has to live on the client. So realistically, how do you give people a secure way to manage their comments? Well, we didn't really need to, because we just say, well, go and get a GoInstant account, and you can look at your data structure and manage it there for now.
How do you guys persist that? Is that like in some kind of really flat key value type store, or are you using graph databases, or what's? I don't know if you can talk about that, but I'm really interested in it.
I think it's very fluid. It's changed a lot since we started. I think when GoInstant was first, when GoInstant first came into this real-time data persistence thing, we didn't actually think data persistence was going to be a big deal. We didn't think we were going to maybe need to persist data for as long as we actually do, which is basically forever. And so it was more of a how do I put it? The channels API right now is a way that you can, just notify other people. You can add an expiry to a key, and the key self-destructs. Or you can say this key is dependent on this other key, and when that key is destroyed, the key that you're referring to will be destroyed too. So that's kind of how we thought it was going to be used, and then of course real usage is totally different than you expect. And so now we've kind of moved into a heavily optimized Postgres database. With Redis on top. So Postgres is handling like long-term storage, and I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with LevelDB, but I think the architecture, and I'm not an expert on this, isn't part of the code base that I interact with with any frequency. But I think it basically works the same way LevelDB does, is that the stuff that people are interacting with a lot frequently is in Redis, and the stuff that is kind of in long-term storage is in Postgres. Something along those lines. No expert here. But I know that they are looking at the graph database stuff. So you may see that happen in the future too.
So you guys are owned by Salesforce. Are they one of your users too? Does Salesforce use GoInstant?
Yeah, I think they'll probably become our biggest users. If you look at them, if you look at all of their customers, an extension of Salesforce. I went to Dreamforce like last year, and there was 140,000 people there. I mean, that's what, 20,000 more than the Super Bowl. They shut down part of San Francisco, and I mean, the energy and stuff was amazing. And again, a lot of these people aren't developers, but they do have a large development it's like the conference. It's like there's 4 conferences happening at once. So one of the conferences was kind of a developer conference, and that's pretty much where I spent most of my time. And it was amazing just talking to people and, talking to people about GoAngular and GoInstant and, how they had planned to use it. So that's one thing. You've got the customers of Salesforce, but then you also have products at Salesforce that could perhaps in the future depend on GoInstant.
I was amazed with Salesforce recently, hearing all of the things they're doing. Like, they have a Polymer application that's in production already. They sponsor all these hackathons, like the Dreamforce you were talking about. What was the big prize for that? Like $1 million for
$1 million. I mean, and they ended up giving away a lot more than that. I think that's a pretty exciting thing when you work for an organization that's putting as much effort and energy and money, really backing it up with money into the industry that you care so much about.
Right. And putting it back into their own products and pushing it out to the communities, which is great.
And it does look like it's been announced. So unveils the future of mobile app support, launches Salesforce One Service Cloud SOS. So SOS is a product that Salesforce has just announced. This was April 24th. And that's a product that GoInstant is being used in.
Awesome.
I don't know if that's actually been publicized.
Nice. I know that recently, I think yesterday, I read an article that that Salesforce is moving into. They have a plugin for wearables for the CRM piece. Is there any integration as far as like capturing data for specific APIs for wearable data that you guys are thinking about?
So they actually used. They asked us to help them build a demo for Dreamforce last year. It was this Google Glasses demo. So they had this guy up on the stage, and he was fixing some type of hospital machinery. And he needed support, so he hit a button on his phone, and that was like I think it was actually, I mean, you could call it SOS now, so it called a support agent who was connected via GoInstant to his Google Glasses, and basically, they could draw on the screen the part of the machine that needed to be repaired. And of course, he could snap pictures of it, but it was the video stream was being streamed live by the glasses through GoInstant to the. I mean, this is a mock-up. Like it's not a real working example. Well, it is a real working example, but you wouldn't find this in a product tomorrow. And so I thought that was pretty cool, and it definitely you can see that it's definitely going to be a use case for GoInstant inside of Salesforce.
That's awesome. And as far as like the user base, is there a lot of what are the bigger names, I guess, using GoInstant in production today? I mean, there's Salesforce, obviously.
Yeah, it's. I mean, a lot of the bigger customers are Salesforce customers, and I don't think I'm allowed to name drop them because they actually are Salesforce customers that sign up for some type of Salesforce package. We're a little bit isolated in a way at GoInstant from Salesforce, but we've started to really appreciate the type of things they do and the passion they have for customer service, and they have started bringing us into more and more relationships, real customer relationships. So we have a few customers that were even on the old platform that Salesforce has allowed us to keep taking good care of.
Are there plans to to have other libraries supported like React or even Polymer?
So I actually used React in the Ouija project. I think React is a really great framework for building components. Where Ouija is this very small commenting system that's going to have lots of instances on the same page. I figured React would be good for that. I wanted it to be like highly responsive and for the UI to be really snappy. And React really gave us that, and so I'm pretty impressed with React. I was really impressed with the guy Pete Hunt. He's one of the core developers for React, and he spent some time in IRC just chatting over what we were building and what the best approach was, and I really appreciated that too. So I'm not sure that React is because React really just handles the view. It has no concept of a model or controller, and I like that. I mean, I think that's a strength. So perhaps React is a framework that should be able to be used alongside the core GoInstant platform, or maybe we do build something for it. I'm not sure. I definitely think there's plans to build something for Ember I'm guessing we'll probably build something for Backbone eventually too. So yeah, I think we'll hit all of the frameworks eventually. I mean, we have in hackathons, we've already built one for Polymer and one for Ember and one for Backbone to kind of like feel out what it might look like. But the challenge there is the platform's changing so rapidly right now, and that's why you don't see us investing in another framework right now. Is more that we want to let the platform solidify a little bit before we start creating another framework, because we don't want to have to continuously change something that people are dependent on.
Oh, for sure.
And in the case of Angular, it was really good timing because I knew Angular 2.0 was on the horizon, and could kind of plan around the next iteration of platform with the next iteration of Angular.
Yeah, and that's going to be difficult for everybody, I think, with the way that Angular is now modularizing everything, and there's a very vagueness around how 2.0 is really going to look when it's revealed.
Early days yet, for sure.
So, Christian, do you have any more thoughts?
Probably not as many as you'd think. I'm looking forward to trying to build something with GoInstant. I haven't actually dipped my toes in the water yet, so looks really exciting.
Let us know what you think.
I will. I might send you an email or something and try to drag you into a pairing session.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Matt, is there anything that you want to share with listeners out there, how they can get involved or contribute to GoAngular, or any resources or anything you'd like to plug?
So, I mean, you should check out goangular.org. That'll kind of link you to anything that you need to get started with GoAngular. There's a couple of videos that we did that you can kind of browse through. And specifically, there was a recording we did at Google that really focuses on the model, and it's the real how to craft a perfect real-time model. And it isn't GoAngular specific; it's kind of more general than that. But I tried to address a lot of the questions I've received over the last year specific to GoAngular, but made it more general purpose. So that's probably worth checking out if you're curious. What else might be of interest? We are in the process of making a guide on how to build a full application from scratch using Angular and GoAngular. And I mean, let's say there's 12 steps. There'll probably be more like 15 or something by the time I'm done, but we'll start with less. And only a couple of those steps are really going to include the parts around GoAngular, and I'll try to make those multi-purpose too. So if you're using your own homegrown real-time system, or you're using something else, then it'll still be useful to you. And that's going to address a lot of the times the questions we get are like, how do I fit a real-time API into my entire application structure when I'm using a backend as a service for my authentication and everything else? And so I'm kind of going to give an example of that, which we're actually going to live stream, not this Tuesday coming up, but the one after, I think. So there should be some videos and stuff available, and we'll put that content all online. And we'll also put the app that we're building online.
Yeah, done us about that live cast. I'd love to watch.
Will do. And then in terms of things I want to plug Ghost and Ouija. Ghost is a really cool publishing platform that was kickstarted last year. It's kind of I shouldn't say this. Yeah, it's not a competitor for WordPress, but we're all thinking it's a competitor for WordPress. So you should totally check it out. And Ouija is a commenting system that we put together. So yeah, I'll plug that.
So yeah, I mean, it's a great project if you haven't checked it out.
It is. It's a good project, good community. Definitely worth seeing.
Okay, and if people want to find you, what's the best way to pair program with you, or hang out, or just troll, whatever?
Yeah, so shoot me an email at mattkrieger@goinstant.com, or look me up on Twitter at matt_Krieger, or you can find me at poor deprived blog at movefastbreakthings.ca.
All right, well, that wraps up today's episode. Thanks everyone for listening, and nothing funny to say, so I'm just gonna say see ya.
This episode comes to you at least in part through the support and sound equipment generously supplied by 3Pillar Global. 3Pillar is a software product development company in Fairfax, Virginia. 3Pillar is a leader in creating purposeful and innovative product experiences, and they were recently named to the Washington Post Top Workplace list of 2014. You can follow 3Pillar on the Twitters at 3Pillar Global. To find out more and see current job openings, please visit 3pillarglobal.com.